Welcome to Archispeak, the podcast that talks about what it's like to work in the profession of architecture. What are the kinds of things that you're noticing about behavior and how this or any other kind of influence? There's lots of different hot issues going on right now, right? There's political stuff, there's law, there's, like I said, California's not even in stage 1 opening yet. We're talking about maybe a month away. We might start to go back to the office, but now with these new spikes, we might not. We might push that out even further. So with all these different influences, what are some of the things that you and I, have been observing about people, right? The people who actually use the spaces that we design and build for them. So I stood in line the other day to go to the bakery, right, to get a coffee and to get a croissant. And I've noticed throughout the COVID-19 thing that, so when it first started and everybody's out, wearing their masks, I felt like, and I personally felt like, there was a lot more hand gesturing going on to be like, hi, right? Mm-hmm. Like just waving. Because I felt like there was so much fear and uncertainty in the air, right? It was just kind of this, it was palpable. And it was like, are we going to be able to go to the store to get the stuff that we need? Is there going to be the stuff that we need there? Are we going to have to stand in a line? How long is that line going to be? How many of these things are we going to be able to get? There was all of these unknowns, right? And so as we've kind of dealt with that, there was a lot of, because you couldn't see half of somebody's face anymore, right? It was like, there was lots of hand waving. Hi, right. It's okay. Like, we're in this together. I noticed that a lot. I noticed a lot of people really expressive with their eyes and hand gesturing and stuff. And so then, like last week, I was out, and I've noticed that has changed a lot. Have you noticed that?
Yeah, I've got kind of like some takes from even the early days of, and it's so funny to talk about early days, and we're only talking about just, how humanity is reacting to all of this in just a few short months.
I think, it feels like years, though, right?
The communicative behaviors between people are just so, let's just say, back in the old days of February, when we actually walked through a store, and maybe you saw somebody and you kind of gave them a nod or kind of like a quick gesture or something like that. And then the evolution of this now, social distancing, face masks, all of these different things. It's really interesting. So, when you're talking about the very expressive face and things like that, early on, because everybody seemed to be, should I be here? Should I be in this, grocery store getting groceries? Oh my God, here comes another person. I need to turn away from them, and it would literally see as like, okay, I need to go past you. And if you're on one side of the aisle and I'm on the other side of the aisle, we're pretty close to the social distancing norm that we need to be of the 6 feet. And so we'll be fine. But then you would see them turn their entire face away from you and just almost pretend that you're the one with the plague.
Right.
And so then, you watch that evolution throughout the months and stuff like that. And then, you almost get this, people are very tired of not being social and not looking at people in the eyes or not saying things to them. Mm-hmm. And so, you got to the point of a few weeks ago now that people are, far more expressive with their hands and their eyes. And I mean, it's so funny. It's like, I'm very expressive and use my hand and facial gestures. I never can hide anything when I'm talking because I'm just got an expressive face. So you can very much tell when I'm joking, even though you can only see half of my face, you can tell when I'm trying to crack a joke or be sarcastic or things like that because, I'm just trying to everybody seems so tense. I am just trying to bring a little bit of levity to it, but there's still, now I've kind of traveled through a few states and there are stark differences from being very close to DC, where it's mandatory face mask wherever you're at. And everybody is very much following the rules, or at least in the bubble that I live in, everybody, and even when I was hiking on the Appalachian Trail, when they opened up some of the hiking paths and stuff, people were hiking with face masks on. And you know how hard that is, because you're huffing and puffing and everything else. And so everybody was very respectful. The further and further I got west, or Midwest in this particular case, the more and more you would see people very cavalier about it. I mean, today we went into a grocery store and my daughter and I had our face masks on, and people were looking at us like we were a problem to them because none of them had face masks on. The employees of the store did. And, there was the social distancing stickers on the floor that says, go this direction and stay 6 feet away and all of that other stuff. And we were following it because it almost became second nature to us. But
yeah,
everybody else was looking at us like, and there was even a point where somebody gave me a look that was pretty confrontational. I mean, nothing came of it, but the look that they gave me was just like, what the hell is wrong with you? You're just a sheep because you have that face mask on. And I'm like, simmer down, fella.
Yeah, I kind of feel like here, I haven't experienced that here because I think it's very much, at least in the town that I'm in, it's very much a face mask is mandatory kind of a feeling. Although, the state mandate, which just came out last week, they came out with a new one, and it's if you're standing in line, if you're in a store, if you're in any kind of circulation or utility kind of, if you're going to the restrooms or anything like that, you got to wear a face mask. But you don't when you're doing certain things, right, like sitting at a table at a restaurant or, there's a few different guidelines for that. But what I've noticed pretty strongly is now kind of like standing in line at the bakery, nobody's saying anything anymore. There aren't the hand signals anymore. And
right.
Granted, it is hard to hear people. Like, yeah. I totally get that. But I kind of feel like it's turning into more of a, I want to say car culture, but that's not the right word. It's more of like what's road rage, right? Where you're in this personal bubble. And I feel like the face mask has become
right.
this shroud of anonymity where your behavior can be different than who you actually are. And so,
right.
It's like you see somebody on the freeway here in Southern California and they're flipping people off and honking and like they get out of the car and they're like, June Cleaver. And they're Jekyll and Hyde on some level. And I kind of, this isn't that level, but it is like different behaviors depending on the shroud that you're behind. And so I think a lot of people see that car as like this protective shield where you can't hear me, you can't really see me, you definitely can't see like 90% of me, so you don't really know what I look like. So there's this, I get to be anonymous and I get to be different. And I kind of feel like that's happening with the face masks. And that does bug me, like for sure, is that you can't see those expressions and you don't get that level of communication. And it makes me feel like it's interesting. I guess it's just interesting to watch the behavior change as things progress and how quickly that changes and how quickly people adapt to it in good and bad ways. And so then I start to wonder, like, how does that translate into the classroom? A classroom full of kids where some of them are super unruly and a teacher has to deal with that. What happens now, right? When other kids, like, do they, what's that behavior going to be like? What's it going to be like in the library? What's it going to be like? There's so many different scenarios that we kind of design for, and there is a certain level of accountability built in because you're not anonymous, and now there's more anonymity because people are wearing face masks. Like, how does that, and then do we even have to worry about that? Is this just temporary? Like, do we know? I don't even know if we know, but is it something we don't really have to deal with long term?
So what's interesting is that that I am working on a building right now for Hopkins, Health, and it is a building that is going to be a medical research building. Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine will be the occupant, and there's going to each of these 11 levels of lab spaces are going to be they're going to be occupied with a variety of different research and stuff going on. So as we move through this, and there's certain different lab types that we're building throughout the building, and so there are different levels of I learned a term most recently, the BSL, the bio safety levels, and what that means in certain certain types of environments. And so they were talking about, the different types of BSLs, BSL2, BSL3, and what those really mean. And, should we be looking to make this building, a more stringent, bio safety level than, what we're currently designing to? And what would that mean? And, then we've, they've reached out to us and they've asked us, okay, we want you to start taking a look at. Now we understand that, and they, of all people, my gosh, they, almost everything that I've heard come out of the, Hopkins School of Public Health, before it's been, put out onto the streets, they say that, this is, we're like, say, Maryland is going to peak at, X time in, the month of May. Sure enough, almost to the hour, they, that they had predicted it, a couple of months prior, that's when we hit our peak. And then, they talked about all these things. And so I listened to them actually pretty carefully, because to be quite honest with you, that's what they do for a living. Like, we design buildings for a living. They research, infectious diseases and things like that. And they look at the public health and they help, direct policy on public health. And so, to be quite honest with you, I listen to them a little bit, or a lot of it.
A lot of it.
and they actually talk about what they actually predict to see as, people are thinking that the pandemic is winding down. And they say yes during these months because of the type of virus it is, and it doesn't really react very well. But because it is actually still around and it is an active, virus, that when we actually get into the cooler, wetter months of the fall and then into the winter, we are expecting to actually see an uptick in, potential rise in the pandemic. And, and if that be the case, as one of our clients said, we're going to have to learn to deal with this, because this isn't the first. This is this isn't the last. This is the first of many, because of just the way that humanity and nature and everything else is starting to interact, that you're going to see this more and more. And so people are going to have to learn how to live and work and exist through a pandemic, because otherwise, if you actually sit down and think about it, look at what happened to the economy in just this, 3 months. We always hear our bosses or financial advisors and stuff say that you should always have a reserve of 3 months or more in your bank account. So if something dire happens, that, you at least have some float time. And, you find it funny, and I don't mean to get political here, but you find it funny that a lot of the people who are telling us that we should be preparing for the worst didn't prepare for the worst. And so, we have, this economic struggle going on right now, where companies are closing down or shutting down or laying off or going through very long-term furloughs and stuff like that. And so we really do actually have to learn to live through some of this stuff so that, our economy can pick back up. And to be quite honest with you, the question is this a type of disease that we have to build an immunity to through exposure, or is this just something that beyond the common cold type stuff? And, there's so many questions, but, where I was going with that is what was interesting is that they're starting to do assessments, because, both these projects that we're working on are joint ventures between the, Johns Hopkins University and Johns Hopkins Hospital. I don't know if I've ever said this before on the podcast before, but they're two separate entities that, work together, just like, you have Harvard School of Medicine and you have Harvard Health, and they're two different branches, but, they're teaching hospitals and things like that. And so they work very closely together. So they do have shared resources. And what's interesting is, so they have some of the top architects that are working with the hospital that are actually looking at and assessing, okay, what does this mean for us? It comes down to, how many people are, do you actually have that would normally occupy each floor of that building? And then if we enter into a social distancing type thing, how many people could you fit into that if you do like 100% social distancing?
Right.
Or if you do a 50% occupancy where, you're only allowing 50% of the total occupancy to actually be on site at one time, And then what does that mean? You know, some people are going to be in the lab, some people are going to be in the write-up stations. I mean, some people are going to be doing other things. And the one that kind of triggered me when we were talking about this, now, you know, think about this, that, you know, all of these universities, regardless of the medical universities or any university, right now is really facing, and you and I are facing this because we have college-age children. You just have a recent graduate, and mine's going into his sophomore year of college. And what does that really mean to them? I mean,
Right.
how are they going to be going into? And you and I, we design academic buildings,
Yeah.
and so they started to basically look at all of their spaces on the university side of things, and they were saying, okay, if we overlay the social distancing, now they actually, what's interesting is they have a 7.5 foot social distancing, not the 6 foot that the CDC, you know, says. And the reason being is because they don't actually, you know, whereas the CDC counts from the center line of the head, they actually count from the perimeter of the body.
Okay.
So when they're looking at this, they started looking at this issue, and they say, okay, what does that mean to all of these different spaces? And the one that stood out to me is that they had a 240 person auditorium, and they overlaid social distancing. They overlaid paths of travel. Then they overlaid the teaching area.
Yeah.
And they found out that 240 space auditorium could seat 23 people.
Yeah.
Think about so you try to fathom that. You know, it's just
Right.
like, oh my gosh, we are designing for spaces that per code can occupy this, but per pandemic, you're only getting this. And then you think about, if we think about the economic impact on a university that is expecting to have 240 bodies in that auditorium, and they can only get 23, where do we go from there?
Right.
And these are the things that we need to constantly keep thinking about as we're designing these. So yes, we all are going to be designing things for, let's call it the normal situation. And let's use the big, you know, podcast air quotes. But
Right.
then everybody needs to think about, if this occurs or if this, you know, comes back up, what is that really going to mean for us when
Right.
we're, you know, trying to help them design these buildings and prepare them, you know, almost future-proof them.
Right. We actually just went through a quick exercise to prototype a tool that basically does what you're talking about. So, and our goal with this was not internal, but external, like giving a administrator of a K-12 school or a teacher in a classroom some tools to help them understand the impact of the walls that are set in the room that they're in, what that's going to have on their pupil population. So try to say that 3 times fast.
Yep.
So we basically developed a tool that it just lives on the internet, on the web, and you can adjust the classroom width and length, and you can tell it, you know, what doors and where their locations are. And then it basically creates a circulation path between the doors. And then the rest of the space with all of the buffers that you're talking about, you know, where the teaching wall is and if there's casework or whatever, it just says, okay, based on, you know, a 6 foot radius, how many 6 foot radius circles can we pack into this room? And it's crazy how small that number gets and how fast it gets.
Oh my God,
right?
yes.
Depending on all the different layout permutations that there are in one school alone, right? Luckily, a teacher only has to worry about their room. But if you're the high school principal or the elementary school principal, and you've got an entire catalog of rooms, and everyone's maybe there's some that are the same, but most of them are a little bit different for one reason or another. You get a pretty good idea pretty quickly of like what it's going to be like to be in that space, and then how does that impact food? How does that impact schedule? How does it impact teaching? How does it impact all these other things? And you realize pretty quickly, like, you've got to augment with digital, right? You've got to augment with technology,
right?
Because how else are you going to do it? Like, I don't like that. What are your alternatives? There's not too many out there. Like, you can't do what you used to do anymore. So what are you going to do to adapt quickly?
Well, what's interesting is, my wife is a first grade teacher, and she has been, obviously when the pandemic and the shutdowns occurred, obviously she went home and, was teaching from there. And, one of the things that she said is that this was absolutely the worst experience that she's had, because there was a learning curve and there was, there's obviously, discipline issues, or let's not really call them discipline issues, more like paying attention issues. I mean, it is so easy for a kid to get distracted when she is in the comfort of their own home and, they see their cat run by, or, mom is in the kitchen and making lunch for somebody. And then the brother and sister are running around and all of this other stuff. And there's so many distractions that you really can't have the kids focus. And one of the things that, I always talk about is that first grade, just as an example, it is just this milestone that they're going from kindergarten. And yes, kindergarten is becoming a little bit more than just eating paste and, stuffing crayons in your nose and stuff like that. But I mean, you go from what I sometimes term as a little bit more play-based education to first grade, where actually now it's real. You have to sit down in you're at your desk and you really have to pay attention. And so they're really teaching you. I mean, I've got to applaud any and every first grade teacher out there right now that, when you really have got to think about what they're doing is they're creating the habits and the behavior of future learning, because they're literally taking them from, these are the first, pre-K and K are the first time that kids are, really being away from their parents. And so they're now kind of comfortable. And the reason why it's a little bit more play-based than, rigid is because, this is the first time that they've ever really been away from their parents. And so now you're throwing them into a situation where they've got to be students and sit down and pay attention and listen to Miss Phelan talk about all of this stuff. And so she is just absolutely dreading that if she starts digitally, how do you take new kids and basically set the tone for learning, from here on out with them,
right,
when they're so covered with distractions? I mean, think about how we get distracted, and we try to stay professional as we possibly can when we're on these Zoom chats and calls and all of these other things that we're doing in the digital realm of things. But I mean, even we get distracted, or even we, how many times do when somebody puts themselves on mute, it's because they're either, going up to, refill their coffee, or they're not really paying attention. And I learned this great response because I knew the guy was not paying attention when we were talking, and he came off of mute, and I thought it was a beautiful response. He was like, "I'm sorry, you were breaking up. Can you repeat that?" You just weren't even paying attention, dude. But I am going to use that from here on out because that's beautiful.
You're breaking up. Oh, that's great. Oh, man. Yeah, usually I'll be, because my temporary workspace is in our bedroom, and it's like my wife needs to come in and get something, so I have to mute it. I got to turn the camera off. She doesn't want to be on camera. And so, yeah, it's just these are the kinds of things that we're all adapting to. And I wonder, big picture, again, going back to kids learning. I have a hard enough time right now transitioning between work and home. I have a really hard time. How does a kid transition between learning in an educational environment and home? It's got to be way harder than it is for me, even, because this is they just learned how to do this in school. They just learned how to separate the two, and now they're smashed back together. It's got to be really hard.
Oh, absolutely. And so honestly, how do architects fit into that? Is that, we're, some of the best people suited for assessing some of these, as you said, developing tools and assessing spaces and finding out what they have and what they can't have in kind of a, pandemic mode type occupancy, which, everybody, is talking about, well, do you think that this is going to change the building code? Probably not, because I think this is more, in my own personal opinion, I think that this is more of an administrative type response, that you automatically know how many people you can fit within your building. But administratively, you have to figure out how many people you really want in your building. and how many people you feel comfortable with, and how many people will feel comfortable being in that building if, Evan just kind of sneezed.
Right.
Does he have the COVID? I mean, I'm not going to sit next to him. Sorry, man. 6 feet or not, dude sneezed. And so it's going to be very interesting, especially in the transition. Now, everybody's assuming that we're going to go back to normal again, air quotes, normal. But, in the meantime, there is that transitional period, and it seems like it's going to be in our, kind of like hyper overreactive world right now, that it's going to be a long time before people are going to be comfortable with a 100% occupied building.
Yeah, it makes me even think, there's so many things about buildings that people do not even think about, right? They don't think about the building's central nervous system or the building's, every building has these different systems in it, right? They don't think about the HVAC. They don't think about the way that the lighting affects them. And obviously, lots and lots of things have come to the surface to make people more aware of that stuff. But when you look at the spread of anything via the HVAC system, you start to think about all these existing facilities that were designed with none of that in mind. And how do those adapt?
Absolutely.
So you and I have both been to schools that were designed in the 20s and the 30s, right? Where all of the infrastructure is strapped onto the exterior of every wall and every surface that you can see, because it's impossible to get into where it's all hidden. And it makes me start to think about, how are we going to make... So what's interesting about that is people don't even notice that stuff, but architects do. And I think architects are really hung up on that stuff, where most people don't care, right? Like, they think of that, if you look at pictures of overdeveloped cities where there's 50 satellite dishes on the side of a building, not just one, right, at your home, but 50, or there's just wires spaghettied on the outside of a building to make all that stuff work, or they added an elevator to the side of a building, right, and it's just strapped on. There's ductwork flying everywhere. And so you start thinking about how, like, people just don't care about that kind of stuff, and we're so obsessed with the aesthetic and we're obsessed with the space. But what do you do with all this existing infrastructure that's already out there? Do you just and I think a lot of that stuff is pretty interesting, right? Like, I like to take photos of that stuff. I've got photos on my Instagram of like crazy electrical panels and conduit and wiring, and that's going to happen more and more, right? Because you start to look at, like, even returning to work, and people aren't allowed to use stairways in tall towers, right? Unless it's for an emergency only. You're only allowed to put 2 people in an elevator. What are you going to do? Like, well, strap some more elevators on the side of that building, right? How are you going to get people to the 70th floor quickly?
It was interesting is, like, early on in the design decision, we started talking about destination dispatch elevators, and, how that you can basically kind of like efficiently move people in and up through this particular building that we were working on. And they're, not really that normal in most cases, and it's sometimes cost prohibitive. But the interesting thing about those is that, if you've got like 15 people waiting for the elevators, it's going to say, okay, people going to floors X, Y, and Z, you're going to take this elevator and it's going to get you there faster. And if you're going to the 5th floor and you're going to the 12th floor and you're going to this floor, you're going to take that elevator, and that elevator. It's more of a logistics they're
problem.
all programmed to like run off those.
Right.
And it totally is, but I mean, it's a digitally thought out, logistics problem where you basically enter in where you're going, and it's going to do the thinking for you of how to efficiently do that.
Right.
And so then you overlay, again, you were talking about the logistics of things, is that, then you overlay the operational idea of all of this. And it's just like, okay, you're going to have 15 people who want to go to the floors, but you're only going to allow, 3 of them up there at a time to use the 3 elevators that you have. And so how efficiently are you going to be able to move people through there?
Yeah.
And that's why I'm saying is, like, the thought of like dealing with a building pandemic wise is going to be more of an operational logistics thing. And architects will be there to be able to be best suited to help them kind of understand what they have and what they need. But, if you think about this, now, most of the time we're building buildings and designing buildings for, pretty cost conscious when we're doing it. And we're thinking to ourselves, okay, how do we make buildings efficient, but also, reduce the overall cost, right?
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, typically things are designed to the absolute minimum that they need to be.
Exactly. And it's so tight. So there's no real flexibility in the whole overall design of a building. So if you need to run new ductwork so that you can, do more filtration or treat the air a little bit differently or things like that, most buildings don't really have that flexibility in them.
No,
and so then that goes back to what you're saying is like strapping things along the side. I mean, if you look at the evolution of, and I'm just going to use, I'm going to continue to keep using Hopkins as an example because it's a historic site that has got historic buildings and newer buildings and old buildings and basically every kind of generation of building type, throughout the thing. And if you go to the aerial map of it and you look at the evolution of these buildings, you see, okay, the mechanical system was in a big penthouse. Well, then the building, use changed. And so the mechanical use changed. And so there's a greater demand. And so not only do you have everything jammed within that penthouse, but now you're adding stuff to the roof and, you're building stuff on dunnage and now you're running ductwork down the side of a building and, and you're doing all of these different things. And that's the evolution, that these buildings have been forced to do. And so, we have this conversation, probably you guys do too, but we have this conversation. It's like, financially, what is thinking about designing for pandemic responses going to do? It is going to make buildings, because they're going to be overly conscious, trying to get as maximum flexibility in them. And then what happens if we do actually, okay, we're going to be at 100% occupancy, but then what happens if we do have a pandemic? How do we convert that over to a half-use space and things like that? And does that mean that I have to move all my offices around? Do they need to be, detachable partitions, or, do we, what do we do? And all of these other things. And so, it's interesting that, there's a lot of people out there working diligently to come up with ideas, but I mean, has anybody, maybe architectural community as a whole just sat down almost like a share circle, right, and said, hey, let's start talking about
Absolutely.
What do you think this design response means?
Yeah, this has to be applied across the board at so many levels. This type of thing needs to be a community response so that not everybody is reinventing the wheel every single time, every single building. They're not that
right.
unique. And I think what's interesting is you've kind of talked through this whole thing and you started off by saying you don't think that it's going to change the building code. I think you've pretty much convinced me that it is going to change the building code because you have to build additional scenarios in that have never been required before. And like we have kind of started talking about, this is the first of many of these things that are going to happen. And so I always,
right.
You don't want to over respond to the first one because obviously things are going to spike and then settle. But at the same time, you kind of have to go to that next level and say, how does this affect the code? How does this affect policy? How does this affect the advice that we give people who are building buildings or in the middle of building or designing buildings right now so that those buildings are effective and flexible and they do allow for some of these things that we're talking about. It's a very complicated problem set, and it seems to me like the really engaged brains, the better on this kind of a thing, so that we can come up with guidelines that help the greater community, not just small little silos here and there.
Totally agree with you.
I don't know if I feel any better about this.
Well, the thing is that you literally have to be, I constantly call myself the alarmist on the project team because I'm always raising an alarm one way, shape, or form. And so, okay, well, if you're going to do that, then have you thought about this, and this? And, those are the conversations that we as architects and, we as architects need to lead our clients in having. We need to have them amongst ourselves with, okay, well, what does this really mean if you do that? And then we need to be the educator to the clients. It's okay, if you want to do this, this is what you need to do. And you need to like, come in with your whole, like, how like a lot of times we go into project meetings and you don't really want to overwhelm the client. So you bring a small group of people in because, again, you just don't want to overwhelm them. And I don't know if you've ever had that, but I have that all the time where it's just like,
you show up with 10 people and it's like, what?
Just a small group. And you're like, whoa, why? But now, honestly, that's where the conversation is going to need to go. You're going to need to have a room full of experts.
Right.
And I'm not going to come in there as an HVAC expert telling, you that this mechanical system, whereas I may understand the mechanical system for, medium to large size buildings and things like that, I'm not going to be the one who's going to tell them, what they need to do with their particular equipment. And I'm not the one that's best suited for assessing their existing equipment and saying that, okay, to meet pandemic needs, you're going to need to do, this to your equipment. I'm going to say, okay, here's what your building has right now. And for you to operate in this mode or that mode or that mode, you need to do this or this or this.
Right.
And so we're going to be bombarding them with so many experts on the matter just because as much as we're convincing ourselves that this is the way it should be, we need to convince them that this is the way they need to do it. And then they need to then overlay and inform us, overlay their operational sequence of things and say, okay, this is how we operate our building on a normal, but, help us understand our building so then we can tell you how we would then operate our building on an abnormal.
It is interesting to think about when you're dealing with that layer of, some may call it bureaucracy when you're designing the building because they're not typically the end users. And then we kind of go back to where this conversation started around real observation of people in, just out and about and how things are changing, and kind of bringing all of that perspective to the table and then bringing the building science perspective to the table and the health, safety, and welfare and the code and all of these things. Like, this really does start to get to where the value of an architect really lies. And like you said, we are really well suited to do that. But I think we have to be ready to step up to the plate when it's, which is now, right?
Right.
To actually do that. And also just really take it to heart that we are the ones who have that value to give. We have to be willing and able to do that. And we should be. And to me, like, that kind of paints an interesting path for the future of architecture as far as what we're capable of doing. And then you layer in equity and diversity and all of these other issues that are happening that are rising and bubbling to the top right now.
Right.
Man, what a puzzle. What a puzzle to solve. It's incredible.
And if you think about it, so many different aspects in our human history. And there has been a lot of times where an architectural response is always needed, maybe not to serve the, let's solve, all these different issues that we have. We could depress the living shit out of ourselves of all the different issues that are going on right now. But how are architects best suited to help with all of that? What can we do to the built environment to, make people feel like, this is an inclusive space, that this is a safe space, that this is a space that is for everyone and not just for a select few. Having the hard conversations, talking about, does, normal operation of certain building types promote certain behaviors over another one? And, to kind of take it back to, one of your original thoughts on like just being that almost sociologist, just looking at people and how they act and interact and come in as a community and just looking at them and trying to understand, what can we do to help this, make this situation a little bit better? And, it's creating, spaces that have far more open arms than closed and shut off. What's interesting is like, you see one of the things that I thought was kind of almost I don't really want to call it a disaster, but it was some interesting thinking that was going on during, the rash of school shootings. And I'm absolutely not making light of the situation, but the architectural responses that were coming from some of the, quote unquote experts, but they weren't architects. were these defensible spaces that were essentially creating like a prison-like environment.
I was going to say the same thing.
And you talk about, is this an enriching space? Is this a space that promotes equity and, and just, like in everything? And yes, we are trying to protect, people with, certain aspects of how we design, and, let's just talk about schools and how we design schools. I know that you've thought about it, and I know that I've thought about it on numerous occasions when we were doing K through 12, on how do we make a safe environment, but also an enriching and, learning environment, an environment that they feel safe, but is also something that, promotes education. And, there's just so many different layers upon layers upon layers that you need to take into account, that really who is the best person to have at a table when you're talking about policies that, affect the way that, you would design a building. You have like these, all the, again, like I said, all these different experts that think, about, and I'm blanking on the acronym for, basically school safety, that had, come out through numerous different, meetings and stuff. And, I was doing some research, and not one person on that committee that was looking into school safety was an architect. And that was the one person that they needed to have at the table. Listen to all the experts about, defensible spaces and stuff like that. But then how do you actually implement that idea? Well, who's best to ask but the person who's going to actually be implementing that idea?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think we have a unique opportunity to revolutionize architecture here and the value of an architect. And we just have to be willing to step up to the plate, right? And rise to that occasion to make it happen, or to help make that happen, or at least give it the opportunity for that to happen. The only way to do that is to get involved and to engage and dig deep. Like I think that's one of the things that, as you're talking about addressing these issues, there's no way to address them at the surface level. You have to get educated on all of these different issues and start to connect the dots between them. And otherwise, like you're just barely skating by, right? You're doing the absolute minimum. And I think that our clients deserve more than that. And I think that society deserves more than that from us as a profession. So it would be really amazing to see, the AIA or any other professional group of people start to publish information that's useful for all architects. And maybe that's happening. Maybe I'm just not aware of it. I would love to know if that is happening so that we can help promote that on this show. So if you listeners out there, if you know of things that are going on like that, I'm sure that there is, and maybe I'm just not aware of it. So maybe NOMA's doing stuff like that. Maybe there are things being published by the AIA and code councils and guidelines and all these different things for the various places that we practice architecture. And I know like in our firm, we're doing a ton of research, and we're going to be publishing that out so that our clients have a clue what to do. Because a lot of them are coming to us saying, help us. How do we do this? What do we need to be aware of? What do we need to deal with? And so we've been deep in a research initiative, and we're going to be publishing that. So I'm excited to see what comes out of that. And I hope that that is useful for the greater architectural community so that not everybody has to reinvent the wheel. I think that's a huge issue that's plagued us in the past and kept the profession from moving forward. So I'm really hoping that having these kind of critical conversations about this kind of stuff can help raise awareness and give people the knowledge that they need so that they can actually do something useful with it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's been a great conversation, and it hasn't been a light conversation, and I know you're on vacation, so I'm hoping that you can disconnect and get away and not feel like you're too connected to all this craziness that's going on. But I'm happy that you're out floating on a boat right now, or you will be tomorrow again. Yes,
unfortunately, I haven't disconnected enough as I probably should have, but I never really actually came here.
Yeah, you can't take Zoom calls on a kayak,
but you can.
But
you can, and I did. I think you're absolutely right, and if I can just say that every single solitary architect out there needs to be a leader in not just architecture, but in the pursuits of your life that you actually feel the most passionate about, because bringing that passion into our profession is something that for the longest time has been so closed off and so monochromatic that, everybody who is wanting to be a part of this profession needs to be fully welcomed and fully embrace who they are and what they're passionate about to bring into this profession, to enrich it and to become leaders in not just buildings, but building environments that stretch far beyond just, the regular four walls and a roof, but, something greater than that. And, a lot of people want to call it a, very tenuous and almost scary time. I don't look at it this way. I look at it as we're in a very exciting time. And yes, there are a lot of things that a lot of hard feelings and anger and disgust that people have for one another right now that, we've got to get past. But the only way you can get past it is talking about it, bring it up. People say the only way to, get past all of this is let's just not talk about it. No. We have to talk about it. We have to talk about everything, and in the beauty of the evolution of the term Jedi, of justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion is it really means something more than just damn buildings. And, for people to be very passionate about it. And I absolutely love our circle of friends who are extraordinarily passionate about it, to bring that as part of the roots. It's burying itself into the roots of what architecture is about now. And it makes me feel very happy that we've, surrounded ourselves with, some of the most open-minded and progressive people that is going to really change this profession for the better.
Yeah, absolutely. And just so maybe people have a little bit more to chew on there with the whole Jedi thing, it would be cool. We haven't had a chance to do that on this show yet, but plug the Arcast 2020 live stream that we did a week or two ago, where we got four different podcasts together and kind of reprised our live on the show floor at the AIA conference in 2019 that we did in Vegas, where we had a bunch of special guests join us and we did a live cast then. We did it again this time, but it was virtual. And I thought that, overall the message this time was loud and clear. It was all about the things that you were just mentioning. So arcast2020.com is where you can watch that live stream video recording. And all of the guests that we had on there were just amazing. And I really felt like I was quiet most of the time because I was learning so much. And I felt like that was a great opportunity to learn. So
yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was just, I had some friends who were texting me while we were, alive, and they were just like, "You're not talking." I'm like, "No, I'm listening." And I really truly want to listen because, mine is not the only voice out there that needs to be heard. Everybody's voice needs to be heard. And, here we have, so many different people from so many different walks of lives that have experienced so many different things throughout architecture, through generations of experience through architecture. And it was just great to sit down and listen to them. And I'd love to do that more and more and more. And really encourage people that, if they do go and watch the Arcast 2020, that, really look at and really pay attention to, the conversations that are being had, and have those similar conversations. Have your own conversations about how you're going to improve everything about architecture. Throughout the life of this podcast, we've talked about diversity and equity and live-work balance, and just, how things are within the actual office and how projects run, and just all of these different things. And, we're at an opportunity where the wealth of information that we have within this profession can make all of that so much better if we're just willing to listen.
I think that's a great place to cut it off. Until next time.
Yeah. Thanks. This was great.
Yeah. Good conversation. Have a great vacation, Cormac. I'm really happy that you're out and about and not stuck at home like me. Single tier. All right. That might be all for this episode, but maybe listen to the end just in case. This show is part of the Gable Media Podcast Network. See all the shows at gablemedia.com. That's GABLMEDIA.com. You can help support what we're doing here by leaving a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts to help get the word out, and don't forget to share it with your friends. We'd love to hear from you, so leave a comment on the website at archispeakpodcast.com, where you can find our entire catalog of shows. Thanks for listening. Talk to you soon.
This is what you get. This is what you get. This is a schedule. This is a set. It's unpredictable as you forget. If you blow, you can bet. I know, I know, I know. This is what you get. This is a schedule. This is a set. It's unpredictable as you forget. If you blow, you can bet. I know, I know, I know. Top to the basement. Blow by blow, kinds of steel, very real, very rock, but it's still very rock body. Paper, scissors, sister, preach, deep, open the reach, fast synapse. Right jumps on pages after still the rages and news, and a toy book. And this is what you get. This is what you get. This is a schedule, this is a set. It's unpredictable as you forget. If you blow, you can bet. I know, I know, I know. This is what you get. This is a schedule, this is a set. It's unpredictable as you forget. If you blow, you can bet. I know, I know, I know. What'd you come back to do? What'd you come back to do? What'd you come back to do? To do, to do, to do. It's unpredictable as you forget. If you blow, you can bet. I know, I know, I know. This is what you get. This is a schedule, this is a set. It's unpredictable as you forget. If you blow, you can bet. I know, I know.